was the time where people started going online, and so you had this free CD, 150 hour on AOL, and that's how I met my wife, effectively, on one of the chat room, on one of the AOL chat room. Every night we kept on reconnecting at the same time. It was afternoon for her, and it was evening for me. So we kept on connecting. So we kept on talking. And my mother's plan to keep me in France kind of backfired. As a manager, we say, "Oh, management is like being a parent." Like, I don't know. For me, management is like being a gardener, effectively. I don't like for things to have to be done. Right? If there is something to be done, I want to do it now.
Welcome back to Rooted and Routed. My name is Sabiya Pathan-Withoeck, and I'm back with another guest. He's from France originally, but have moved to US since few years. He moved first to Texas, then to Boston, which is where he's right now. His name is Arnaud Lucas. He's a seasoned tech leader. He's a father of two. Arnaud, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
When did you start your journey in US?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been in the US now for 27 years, effectively, so it has been a while. The first 8 years in Texas doing startups. And then since 2006, I've been in the Boston area, effectively, so very different. The reason why I came to Texas in the first place is because of my now wife, I guess, because she was studying in Dallas at the time, and and she wanted to continue her studies even after we met for some reason. So it was if we wanted to, we had a long distance, not long term, yeah, long term too, but long distance relationship for a couple of years because I had to finish my studies as well. I had to do my military service in France. But once I was done, I found effectively work in the US, in Houston. And so I came to Texas, effectively, so that I could be with my wife. And then we got married like a year after. But ultimately, you can argue I never asked for living in Texas, right? That was not my dream personally.
Okay.
It's just because that's where my wife was. So I kind of followed her and trusted her in some aspect for that. And obviously it worked out for the best. So no complaints whatsoever.
Right.
That said, it was not my first time in the US either, right? So I spent some of my studies in Canada, in Montreal.
Wow.
Before that, actually helped. I helped to organize. Well, organize is wrong. I was part of the Olympic Games in Atlanta in '96,
Wow.
just for there. So which was an interesting time. So ultimately, I think I knew what I was getting into. I remember I spent also like a winter, which was interesting because why do that in Philadelphia? Because I had a friend studying at Wharton, so he's like, "Oh, come over," and then, so we spent a bit of time together. So my journey in the US didn't just start in Texas, I feel. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got my social security number actually in Atlanta during the Olympic Games.
Oh, nice.
So
Okay.
the point is that they messed up my name at the time. So the first thing I did when I came back to the US in Texas was to go to the Social Security Bureau and say, "Hey, change my name on the Social Security." So anyway, lots of things like that.
So Montreal for studies, then to Atlanta, then
But
to Philadelphia. I mean, yeah, you've been to a couple of places, not just Texas. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm not sure why either, because when I grew up, like traveling was not a thing. I mean that, I'm from the countryside. We, I'm an hour and a half away from Paris driving, which is not that far, at least,
Right.
now that I'm a grown up, I feel like it's not that far, but we have not been to Paris until like I was a teenager, for example.
Oh,
So travel was definitely a thing for us.
Yeah.
And so maybe you could argue that once I was able to do things on my own, like I like, okay, now I want to travel. Maybe there is this kind of, okay, well, I didn't do it before, therefore I should do it now. I'm not sure. But yeah, so starting when I was in college, effectively, that's where I started traveling on my own, mostly for studying in different places,
Yeah.
doing exchanges in different places, or like, working summer jobs here and there, effectively. So,
That's an interesting one. I think this is how you explore US because US north, south, east, west, it's quite huge. And the culture within US is quite different, right? So even if you've been
yes.
to like one state, I think it's really totally different in another state. And yeah,
Oh, yes, for sure. Yeah, Texas is very different from Massachusetts. That's
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And Montreal, that was for studies. How long were you there in Canada?
So in Canada, for studies, it was an exchange with McGill, so I didn't stay that long. I
Okay.
wanted to stay longer, to be honest. So, meaning that I stayed there for 6 months
Hmm.
during the winter, actually, which was interesting to be in Canada during the winter. Uh, but actually, I wanted to stay. Like, I actually found an internship there, so a 6 months internship for me to stay there. But then my parents, specifically my mother, is like, "No, you're not staying there. You're coming back. Uh, you're coming back to France. You're coming back home, effectively." So I was like, "Okay, fine." So I came back home, and therefore, as a result, instead of finding an internship in Montreal, I found an internship in north of France, in Lille. So I went there, but that's because of that internship where I was kind of connecting at night because there was nothing to do. So it was a time where people started going online, and so you had this free CD, 150 hour on AOL,
Wow.
so I started doing that, and that's how I met my wife, effectively, on one of the chat room, on one of the AOL chat room, and we started
Your
talking, and
wife.
then every night we kept on reconnecting at the same time. It was afternoon for her and it was evening for me. So we kept on connecting. So we kept on talking, and so that's so meaning that my mother's plan to keep me in France kind of backfired, I should say, very badly.
And that was
So,
starting from a chat room, right?
uh-huh.
Wow,
So, so
that is an interesting one, really. From your family, I mean, family background, right? Moving from countryside to the city, US, and then of course Canada, then US, and meeting your partner, and now you're father of two, right?
yes.
How has this whole journey in the transition shaped your sense of identity? How do you balance that?
Yeah, so I mean, I see that a lot with my kids actually, because we are trying very hard for them to have some kind of French heritage, and obviously they're born here and they are American first, and so it's funny to see that, right? To try to, and for me, it's not your self-identity. People see that as one thing, but I don't think it is. Effectively, I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's a lot of things that makes you who you are,
Yeah.
effectively. But for sure, if I stayed in France, I would have been very, very different. I was talking with one of my cousins a few years ago, and told me, "Yeah, Arnaud, I really saw you in some kind of government job in France, like you're not doing anything exciting other than being at a desk somewhere, like that's doing some scientific stuff. That's how I saw you." And then clearly that was wrong. That's not what you're doing. That's not who you are. Doing startups and then obviously being much more, let's call it adventurous in some ways.
Yeah.
And so definitely that those experiences changed me. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's not like I didn't see chose some of that. I definitely chose part of it, but I felt like there was a need for me to do some of that. But a lot of that was luck, I guess, opportunities that I took, and but that. definitely shaped me into somebody different. That's for sure. There is no. It's very very clear actually, which is kind of scary at the time, but it makes you think that the experiences shape you,
Yeah.
and I think that's true, right? But now I can take that and I can give that to my kids effectively. Like this experiences is not just as being American. It's like, okay, what experiences about being French can I give to my kids? Uh, Same thing about traveling. Like, they started traveling when they were very, very young, effectively. And now that shaped them, right? Both of them will be, where are we going next? And what are we doing? And, so they already like,
It's
and
like
now they started exploring on their own.
the whole thing
So my
of
son,
sorry.
yeah, exactly. So my son, for example, this summer, so we are going back to France because we have a family reunion, so we're doing that. But after France, we are doing a few days in Italy together. But then after that, my son is just going to China for a month, and we won't be there, right? So that shows my point about how you expose them to something, and then they start say, "Oh yeah, that's great. I should do that more." And then at some point, they're like, "Oh, I'm just going to do that on my own," kind of thing. Which is, as a parent, is great, but it's also kind of scary because part of traveling is spending that time together,
Yeah.
discovering things together, and then they're like, "Oh, they're doing that on their own now. What are we gonna do?" But it's what it is.
I think it's the same thing like the way you moved out from the country house to the big country like US. The way your mom,
Mhm.
your parents worried about you and were hoping that you come back. I think the same, there's some sense of the same thing now you experience with your kids. But there is,
Yes.
I think, benefits of really having this traveling experience. And if it really starts from really young age, I find
Hmm.
they're very matured, they're very independent. They take the ownership when you uh, give them the opportunity of traveling young.
Yeah, so we saw that actually because the one thing that we did is that because we're in the US, we kind of welcome some of my cousins' kids
Right.
effectively for a summer or something. So we had the opportunity effectively to welcome them for a few years where, different, I have multiple cousins and they all have kids. And so they kind of send their kids to us for a month or two during the summer. And uh, and you could really see the difference between a kid that has been traveling before versus a kid that had never traveled before. And that's just amazing, like in terms of independence and the ability to just own things and do their own thing. And it's just night and day. And so when you see that, you're like, okay, now I understand.
Yeah. I think there's a transformation that, okay, people think that it's quite scary, but honestly, there's a whole lot of growth that I see when you're living abroad and having your children part of that adventure, living abroad and
Mhm.
traveling. But I think when it comes to balancing, how do you give your French cultural values, because it's quite different, right? How do
I
you?
mean, I think it's a day-to-day thing. Being well, there are things that you push on. For example, we speak French at home, even so they tend to reply in English because it's just easier for them, so they don't want to bother. Um, but the other thing that we do effectively, we send them to French school on Saturday morning.
Ah,
So for multiple reasons. One is that, because they started replying to us in English when we spoke to them in French, like, great, let somebody else try force you to speak French in some shape or form. The other reason is that, that way they learn how to read and write in French,
mhm.
which is not obvious either.
Yeah.
So they are doing that. There is actually a third reason that actually that's not why we did it, but now it's becoming as a nice side effect is that, so as part of going to French school, they are also enabled now to pass French exams, effectively that's certified by the government of France. and that prove their level in French, kind
Mhm.
of thing. And the point of that is that if they are passing the exams soon, I mean they already pass, there are different level of exams.
Yeah.
But if you get to a certain level, then it means that your French university will accept you, for example, without doing any language test because you already have that exam that proves your language level. At work, if you want to work in France, they're going to accept you as well. So for us, it's like, well, that's a nice benefit. Like, not that they're thinking about sitting in France but at least now they could. So it's kind of, give them opportunities. That is not something that necessarily we thought about when we first put them into French school. But now it's like, oh yeah, well, that was a good choice then because
Yeah.
now potentially it opens more doors for them, right? Just like you're having the two passports opens more doors for them. Yeah, and I think it's in that continuity.
And it's really something, not that every country is doing it. France is
Hmm.
doing it. We don't seem to have the same thing in for my son with in Belgium. So he doesn't. So he learns the language, and that's it.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's just that, that I think the other benefit, to be honest, is that, we obviously traveled with them in France. All our families in France, so, we want them to meet family.
Yeah.
But also, I think like there is a cultural aspect, and the cultural aspect they get both because or thanks to travel in France, right, and being exposed directly to that, but also because the French school follows the French curriculum
Mhm.
in terms of the French language. And the French curriculum, I think that's a big part of the French identity, is all about talking about French culture and French history
That's
and
perfect.
geography. They get exposed more to that as well, right? Which I think for me is important because you mentioned what does it mean to be French versus being American? I think that's a hard question. For me, being French is easier to answer because it's not just a passport. To be French, really, not only you need to have the language, obviously, but there is a social norms that have a long history that come from the history of France. That there is a cultural context that come from the history as well. And if you don't understand that history, it's going to be very hard for you to have these proper social norms
Mm.
for you to be able to be seen as a French person, effectively, to be able to communicate and socialize in a French way.
Yeah.
To some extent, French is very rooted in some aspect. Like there is a lot to learn for you to feel like yes, I belong here, which I think it comes also with challenges when people come to France from other countries and it's very hard for them to assimilate. And I think that's one of the reasons for that, is that there's so much to learn for you to feel like, okay, well now, so I remember like in some dinner parties where you have to know about Charlemagne and Napoleon so that you can even have a normal discussion with people. It's like, who does that? And then, well, in the US, for example, that's not really a thing. No, it's not that people don't care about history, but the history is shorter. The
Yeah.
social norms, there are some, but they vary from state to state as well, and they are not, I will argue, not as strong or not as dictated based on history than France, in my opinion. That's my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think cultural context and belonging and the history, that exposure that your kids are getting, I think you're really lucky, in fact, to really have that because not every parents, not every expats away from home have access to. And do
Mhm.
they go? Did you say they go to the French school, or is it more that extra coaching classes, language class?
No, so it's a bit of both, right? So no, they go to local public school here in
Yeah,
the US. But and on Saturdays, effectively, they have a French school, which is effectively a group that specializes in French education.
But it's
it's
not
an
just language.
intellectual group. Sorry?
It's not just the language. It's much more than the language.
Well, so they because they use, like I said, because they use the same curriculum as in France. So
Okay.
they study the same thing as
In
French kids are studying in French, effectively. And so they follow the same curriculum. And we know that because, we know kids in France and we say, oh, you're doing the same thing as our kids. And so it's interesting to see that. But because they're doing that, and the French curriculum is very much based on culture and history, even to just teach the language,
Mhm.
that's how they get a lot of exposure, yeah, for sure.
I think, yeah, they should be really, I mean, you should be really proud of also that they're adapting, they are taking it all in, because sometimes when you're really born and raised for so many years abroad,
Mhm.
connection with the parents' native place, like in your case, the France, right? It can be hard, and it can maybe look like as if we are as parents pushing them to integrate, but it's much more than that, and I'm sure they will understand the benefit of it as they grow and start to travel, and that will probably, I feel, also hit them more as to, okay, I'm from US, I have a US passport, but then when I'm in some other part of the world, I'm seen as French because I also speak French fluently. I have learned the history, the culture of it. So I think it's going to be a little clash, I feel sometimes, because
It's really a push on our side, yes. They are not happy to have to wake up on Saturday morning so they can
oh,
go to
really,
French. They are not complaining too much, so that's why we keep on doing it. Like it's not like they are they're pushing back super hard, but yeah, they would prefer to sleep on Saturday morning.
like, yeah. But I'm sure they will thank you later, not now, maybe later on in future. Yeah.
Maybe we'll see.
Well, from this personal identity and your cultural roots, let's talk about your evolution in career and leadership growth, because
Mhm.
your leadership growth has been from different industries, right? From early startup days in Texas to now leading innovation in at TripAdvisor. You were working in TripAdvisor, Wayfair, and the current is Cambridge Mobile Telematics. How has
Right.
perspective on emerging tech and adaptability evolved? I mean, what's the driving passion to really look at these emerging technologies?
Well, I feel like my my journey has really shaped me to see that with a different eye, right? So, I mean that people say in technology you need to keep on learning,
Mhm.
you need to keep on adapting, right? There are new technologies all the time, and you need to stay curious. You need to do that, and I agree with that. But for me, thanks to my background, you could argue I was forced into that anyway, to do that anyway. Like, you show up in Texas, you're like, well, what do I do here? And then you learn, right? You just adjust. I think that shaped me a lot, especially in you could not say that I was somebody that was very flexible in some ways,
Mhm.
but that I was forced to change to the point now I'm maybe one of, at least at work, I'm maybe seen as one of the more flexible ones. Right, so because and then flexibility also means curiosity, right? It's
Yeah.
also say, oh, we want to go in that direction. Okay, let's try out, see.
Yeah.
We'll see where that goes. And then, but let's fail fast, right? If it doesn't work, great, we'll do something else. That's cool. So there is a, for me, uh, that really changed my thinking, especially as an engineer, right? Engineers, as you may know, tend to be very like focused on one problem and go very deep, and that's what they do. And then they only want to see completion and success, and it has to be perfect, and otherwise it's not good, right? So, and at this point, I'm totally the opposite. I still see myself as an engineer, but for me, it's the opposite. It's like, try this, doesn't work, okay, try that, what that? And I think that's that flexibility that willingness to be curious and learn, for me, kind of effectively shapes my leadership as well. There is another thing about my background, which I think is very important to me, which is uh, that notion that and that's why I've been doing a lot about DEI and DIB is
Mhm.
because for me I strongly believe, and that comes from my own experience, that if you bring people from diverse backgrounds, bringing diverse ideas, your team is stronger. And it's more productive, give you more results. Actually, it has been scientifically proven. It's not just a belief. It's a thing. So, so for me, that means that you're making sure that people can express their ideas. Like, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter who has good ideas can come from anywhere.
yeah,
And it doesn't have to come from me. Actually, I prefer that it doesn't come from me because as software engineers, they are getting paid well, including myself. So I don't just pay people just to do work. I pay them to think, to come up with ideas. Uh, so for me, be able to get all these ideas from anywhere, wherever they are, I think it's also part of what shaped me, right? It's that notion that we are all come from different backgrounds, especially in the US, because there's a lot of that, and that's something that actually is a strength. And I know that in the current political climate, people are
yeah,
wondering over
yeah.
that. But for me, it's very clear. No, having diverse background is a strength, and we should encourage that, and not the other way around.
It's like what I understand is from your profile when I was going through uh, three things that you believe in. One is ownership,
Uh-huh.
the other is diversity, the
Mhm.
third one, strategic ambition. Am I correct?
Yeah, so
So these three,
yeah, so
that like you're driving, this is your passion that drives in your, driven by people first in your work.
yeah, because for me, technology is a tool, right?
Yeah,
So it's not the end. It's not the thing that does anything, right? It's just a tool. And so who is in charge of the tool? People, effectively. Now, Gen AI is coming along and we talk
yeah,
about agentic AI and where, effectively AI can do things. But at the end of the day, somebody still has to watch over that, at
yeah,
least for the time being,
yeah,
until AI takes over the world. So there is no choice than to be people first, right? Yeah, without the people, there is no company, there is no technology, there is nothing. So I think it's more, it doesn't matter your level of empathy.
yeah,
At the end of the day, that's just the reality of things. So you have to take care of the people first, and then those people then will create the technology, will use the technology, will in ways that hopefully give you great success,
yeah,
effectively.
yeah. One thing, the other thing that I liked about your profile on LinkedIn was the articles and
Mhm.
how you use everyday situation moments and then you explain that or connect it with technology. I read the article on domain and that you
Mhm.
explained what is domain with the a very beautiful example of baking with your kid, right? That when you were little, you were baking, and then how you explained what is domain with ingredients and technique, and these two together uh,
Mhm.
becomes, you explain domain through you using the everyday moments. And for me that is really special because that was not just that article, the other article was about gardening, in the garden, and you explained that for ownership, or was it that
Yeah.
on? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, it's ownership and leadership. So I mean, the baking analogy is come from the fact that I'm not a cook or of any kind, right? Yeah, but when my daughter was 2 years old, she started developing a sweet tooth. But my
yeah,
wife doesn't like to bake necessarily because the problem with baking is that you actually have to follow a recipe, right? If you want to have the right result, there's little room for error.
Yeah.
So usually that means that you have to follow a recipe, and only once you master the techniques, then you can start varying in different direction. Uh, Same thing for brewing as well. A brew beer and something like usually there is a you need to have some kind of recipe to start with, and then from that you can live off. And so when my daughter was young, and she wanted to eat sweets, I was like, I guess we have to make them. So my daughter and I started baking effectively together. And so that's how I got into baking. And but for me, that really was that taught me a lot about what it means to own something to the point you can deliver
Yeah.
uh, a
Delegate.
cake at the end of the day, right? So it's how you can, and then the ability to delegate. So what do I give to my daughter to do, and then we ultimately you end up with the right result at the end. So that's where that metaphor of what domain ownership comes from. Gardening, I think for me, there has been a lot of articles about gardening in the sense that people are plants and therefore you have to nurture them and then let them go so that they can be their best. I kind of agree with that, but for me it's more than that because if you look at my garden, like I have like I have raised beds. So I have five different raised beds that are 4 by 4, effectively. And
Okay.
but which plant do I plant in each raised bed? Why? Right? What do I even want in each raised bed? Right? So do I want, my wife likes to cook with a lot of garlic and shallots.
Yeah.
Great. I would have at least one raised bed, just garlic and shallots. That's all there is, right, in there. I like different type of your heirloom tomatoes. Okay, great. But the heirloom tomatoes need a lot of sun. Okay, let me put that in the sunny side of the garden instead of the other side. My strawberries, on the other hand, they don't like a lot of sun, right? If it gets too hot in the summer, they're not going to be good. They're going to burn. So okay, let's put them on the other side. And then so there is all this organization right, into
Organization.
deciding what plant, where do you put them, space capacity management, all these kind of things that ultimately for me reminds me about how you have to organize even as a company,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what teams, what specialties you have to have in each team for that team to have proper ownership over their domain. How do you create the different teams so that they can all collaborate together? Right. So for example, tomatoes and basil go well together. They're complementary plants. All these things, right? So and that's why for me there is a lot of parallel there, like
Yeah.
because as a manager we say, oh, management is like being a parent. Like, I don't know. For me, management is like being a gardener, effectively. So I think that's a better analogy. But although as a leader, as a technical leader, like when I manage multiple teams, multiple organizations, I go back to my gardening thinking about, okay, well, who do I want where for doing what, and what gaps do I have? And because for me, it's very similar in some ways.
I mean, that is something amazing. Do you think that is an easy way to integrate these thoughts, this process into your work, or does your work takes you to the everyday moments and see what is the commonality between these? What
I
inspires?
think
It's
so.
like more hand. It goes hand in hand.
Yeah, it goes in the end. Like it's difficult to say, oh, the source of my thinking come from there and went to there. I don't think that's true. Like I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
Right? I mean that I use what I learned at work to apply it even to my personal life and vice versa. Right? That's people talk, especially in France, like they talk a lot about work-life balance and separating work from
Yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
less of a thing in the US anyway. But ultimately, in my opinion, if you want to be good at what you do, I don't think you can do that, right? Ultimately, you have one brain anyway, so it's difficult to fully compromise. But also, the way that I learn how to work influence the way I know how to do everything else. How do I do my taxes? How do I garden? How do all these things change based on that. Now, I don't think I'm that crazy about that because I know some engineers, for example, they are going to keep track in the bug tracking system about everything to do around the house or everything. I don't do that. But
Okay.
for example, I do to-do list, right? And I do that at my work and my at home. Like, there is a bit of structure like that that I think is a come from my professional experience,
Yeah.
for sure. But also come from me knowing myself. Like uh, I'm not somebody necessarily very patient. I'm not somebody. I don't like for things to have to be done. Right? If there is something to be done, I want to do it now, and that's because otherwise it stresses me out. That's,
Oh, really?
so I
Okay.
know that about myself. Uh, like, people are perfectly happy. Oh, I can relax today. It's like, no, if I know there is something I need to do, I'm not going to relax because that thing needs to go to be done first. So that's the way I am. The one way I found as a worker is like, well, if at least I capture that in some kind of list, so I
Mhm.
don't forget, and it stresses me less because it feels like, oh, I'm not doing it right now, but at least I know that I'm not going to forget about it. So techniques like that, which come from work, because for work, something I'm the same way, but at work, effectively, you don't want to drop the ball on anything.
Yeah.
And yet you have a lot of things, especially as a leader, you have a lot of things happening at the same time. Like
Yeah.
it's very common for me to get like 10 Slack message or having something about 10 different things. And then you have to multitask and kind of assess each of them and then prioritize what you need to do for each of them. And sometimes something quick, let's do that. But sometimes like, okay, I need to get back to that later. Okay, let's keep track of that so that I can actually get back to it later. And because you have so many different things going on, it's very easy to forget them. So, and I don't want to get stressed about that either. So,
Yeah.
so that's, you find ways, right, effectively to make that work for you.
I think that's what, so now I remember the three things that I've come across in your profile was
Mhm.
um, ownership, organization, and then there was diversity. The three things
Uh-huh.
that you really believe in as a leader that will really take you forward, and that is what is needed in the current scenario at work. Organization, because now that you're speaking so much of organization, that was not strategic ambition, that was organization. Then, yeah, the third one. And I think it's
But the organization is all about strategic thinking, right? It's be able to, you know where you're going, you know why. Now plans can change, right? But at least you have that North Star, you have that end goal, and then the question becomes how do you go there? And ultimately, you're going to end up in a different place. That's okay, because most likely that place is going to be better than the one that you imagine originally.
yeah,
Uh, but that's okay. But at least that you have something to go after and not just, doing things like, I don't know, like, oh, there is a point here, let me fix that. Oh, let me fix that. That's not how you forward, right? You move
yeah,
forward because there is a clear destination for you to
yeah,
go to.
yeah. Do you?
Otherwise, you end up somewhere else, for
Mm,
sure.
yeah, absolutely.